Podcast Network's family of shows. Available everywhere.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. And for our fourth segment of the day here on today's show, we're going to do the same thing we did with college football and talk about some NFL games with huge fantasy stakes. I made my thoughts very much known throughout the week about certain games, how I feel about them, and this is just a little bit of a recap at this point for all of these games, but I truly believe that you can't go wrong with many games this weekend in the world of college football. While some of them may seem like duds, I feel like some could surprise you. I've been talking about a couple of those sleeper games. They're not going to find their way onto this list, but ultimately, these four games I'm very excited to break down and analyze from a fantasy standpoint. So without further ado, let's do just that for our fourth segment of the day here, starting off with the game you should all know by now I'm really excited about, a little bit nervous and anxious about as a Seahawks fan, but Cardinals Seahawks. This could be the best fantasy game of the weekend, and I'm not joking in this regard. You may think that a Seattle team that has gone through a very rough week, starting off with that win, emotional win in San Francisco, and then having, the power outage issues at their facilities, and then going up against the Cardinals team at home, fresh off a bye, and fresh off looking like one of the best teams in the NFL, coming into your stadium. It's going to be a weird game, but I think it's going to come down to which offense makes more plays. And both of them know at this point, like I said, what they're comfortable with doing. For Seattle, it's about getting Geno into that groove, getting the ball out of his hands, maybe trying to find some space in the run game to break off some nice runs to keep that time of possession on their side. And for the Cardinals, it's also about maintaining their run game, getting James Conner and Benson going, and that opens up a lot of passing opportunities downfield for Kyler Murray, who's going to be not afraid to do that. He's going to take the shots down the field, like I said. And so, look for this game to be potentially an instant NFC West classic that could determine as well who comes out on top in this division. So that's why this game is number one in my mind when you're looking for some fantasy options. And then, for the second game that I want to talk about, this one, it could depend on a lot of things, right? Because both of these teams have had some injury issues, and certain players not might play, but I still think it's going to live up to the hype. Because, again, this is a rematch of a playoff game last year. The Packers are going to want to be in vengeful mode. And the 49ers, they are reeling right now. But they're still a team with all the pieces to go on a run, unlike any other in the NFL. So that's why I feel like the 49ers-Packers game is going to be an interesting one. And I put tactical slugfest as my big note here, because I feel like no matter what, both of these coaches are going to try to outthink each other, because they are very much tacticians, Matt LaFleur and Kyle Shanahan. For the Packers, I feel like if you're Matt LaFleur, you're going to want to find a way to get Jordan Love in a rhythm early. And if you're Shanahan, you're going to want to get the ball into the hands of McCaffrey, make him a difference maker in the red zone, try and figure out what works down there, because that's been their issue. They haven't been able to put games away because they haven't been effective enough in the red zone. So you got to find a way in the red zone, if you're 49ers, to put the ball in the end zone. And if you're the Packers, you just got to worry about not turning the ball over. And it's going to be risky, because I do feel like this is going to be a big day, a big test for Jordan Love. But I still think, it's what they're going to do. It's how they're going to attack this defense and try and put up as many points as possible and try and get that win to avenge their loss last season. So this game, could go either way. Especially, if Purdy doesn't play, which is still in play as well. But I still think, both teams have enough weapons to make this a very interesting proposition from a fantasy standpoint, no matter who's out there on the field. So I feel like, this has the potential to really be a game that I can sink my teeth into if I'm a fantasy football manager and say, okay, I know who I want to start from this one just because of these two coaches and how they'll play down the stretch in this one. So look for this game to be one of those games you're going to want to monitor and keep your attention on this weekend. Then the third game is where we get a little bit trap gamey here, and I'm giving one of these teams the benefit of the doubt because, like I said, their defense, as much as I like it, has been struggling these past couple of games. They lost a key piece of their secondary, like I mentioned, and it's been affecting the entirety of this defense, but it's still one that can become kind of trap gaming in that this Houston Texans offense hasn't really convinced me outside of what they can do with Joe Mixon. So this Titans-Texans game is really interesting. And I said that Stroud's struggles could continue, and some pundits might be thinking otherwise, but I think this is going to be one of those games where, again, the Texans should win it comfortably, but something along the way, whether it be offensive line issues, whether it be stagnancy in the red zone, or something to do with their defense perhaps, even though that side of the football seems just fine. I just feel like this Texans team is a little bit of a mirage, right? We can't really figure them out. And so this Titans team, for as weird as they are on both sides of the football, the offense, as inept as an offense can be in the NFL outside of the occasional big play from Will Levis. And then the defense, still, one of the more underrated ones, the team when fully healthy, but now sans L'Jarius Sneed not playing up to par. And this is one of those games where it's going to be about, which team struggles less. And as much as I want to see the Texans, because of the fact, like I said, Joe Mixon being potentially one of my favorite starts of the week in this one. Nico Collins suddenly coming to life. A lot of positive things could happen for the Texans, but they haven't happened in games like this against lesser competition when you should be winning big. And on the Titans side of things, I really think, this defense has a point to prove, right? This is a divisional game, and you saw what a team like the Browns did yesterday in a meaningless game for them. They made it their Super Bowl. This could be the Titans' Super Bowl, right? Beat the Texans, and you have something prideful to take into the offseason. So, I feel like, from a fantasy standpoint, it is weird to talk about a game so negatively, but certain things could go off the rails for both teams. Either the Titans' defense continues to struggle, or, surprisingly, C.J. Stroud's struggles continue, and this Houston Texans team looks less and less convincing in wins than they do ever. And so, that's why I feel like this game is so weird to pin down, because a lot of good things can happen, but a lot of bad things could happen as well. And so, I would be cautious about who you pick in this game outside of Joe Mixon, because I really trust him right now as one of the better fantasy running backs in the National Football League at the moment. So this game, weird one, but I wanted to include it just because of the many factors that could go into it. And the last one I want to talk about, another divisional matchup, very feisty one. My dad's probably looking forward to this one. Vikings taking on the Bears. And this one, I feel like, is going to be hyper-focused on the trenches. And what I mean by the trenches is that Bears offensive line that really has been struggling with dealing with how Caleb Williams likes to play football. And this very vaunted Vikings defensive front. And I feel like in this one, when I look at the Bears offense, the reason if Almighty Finesse is in there, I have trepidations about guys like Moore and Odunze and Allen, potentially even their running backs, is because of that defense. Caleb Williams hasn't really seen anything like this Vikings defense before and what it's going to do in terms of disguising different coverages, stunts, little moves that these defensive linemen do is really going to challenge him. And yes, I like that little change they made at the OC position, moving on from Waldron, bringing in Brown, and what that did in that game against the Packers for Caleb in terms of how he looked a little bit more settled and how his decisiveness when he needed to scramble was more clear. But I still think this game is really going to be about this Vikings defense. And in a divisional matchup, anything can happen. But the Vikings have proven that they're going to ride this defense to success in the NFC. And I feel like it's a very effective way for them to go about their style of play because they are a very timely, complementary offense. As Captain always says, Vikes always struggle at Soldier Field and it's messed up turf. And that is exactly why I feel like it's going to be an offensive struggle. But I just trust the Vikings' more complementary style in this environment because of what Caleb Williams hasn't seen. And so, even though a lot of optimism is arising out of this new OC, Thomas Brown, for Chicago, it's going to be a slugfest because of what this Vikings defense does. So look for this one to really be all about Caleb Williams. I'm going to be hyper-focused on how he plays. I do think, he has a chance here to prove his stuff, but it's going to be one of those weird games where it could be a defensive slugfest and it could come down to which offense is more timely. Let me know what you think about these games in the comments, because coming up next we focus on one game and one game only. That Sunday Night Football matchup that I feel like a lot of people are looking forward to. Eagles-Rams, Stardom Cinnamon Vice to close out the week here on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. And after this short break, we'll be talking about it.